Greetings, learners. I'll be your life science teacher for the day together with my colleagues. So, the topic we're going to be talking about today is cells and microscopes. So,
Hi everyone. My name is Sandile Ngwane. I'm here to teach you about a cell. Basically, what is a cell? Cells are basic building blocks of all living things. Basically, we all have cells. A human body has more than trillion cells in it. Yes. Uh, the location of the cell is the nucleus. And the nucleus is one of the most obvious parts of the cell. When you look at a picture of a cell, let's say you're looking at the picture of a cell, you see that it consists of a nucleus. It the nucleus is always in the middle of the cell, and the nucleus contains all of the cell's chromosomes, which encode the genetic material. Basically, what I'm saying is the cell is located in the nucleus. We have two different cells. We have the prokaryote, which are cells that do not have a true nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. We have the eukaryote cells, or organisms that possess a clear defined cell. Basically, the difference between the two is prokaryote does not have a nucleus, and then eukaryotes have a nucleus. The eukaryote cells has a nucleus membrane that surrounds the nucleus. Basically, the nucleus of the eukaryote is true, in which the well-defined chromosomes, the well-defined chromosome are bodies containing the hereditary material are located. Those are the two different types of the cells. Cells have one function. Then that function is to provide structure for the body, take in nutrients from food, convert those nutrients into energy, and carry out specialized functions. Basically, a cell is what makes us human. We are bipedal. It is due to a cell. We have cells all around our body, and cells are important for our body.
the type of microscope we're going to be teaching you guys about is a light microscope. It is the microscope that is commonly used for living cells. A light microscope's definition is it is known as a type of microscope that commonly uses visible light. and a system of lenses to generate a magnified image of small objects. Basically, a light microscope is used to magnify small objects so that we can see them with our naked eyes. We know that we cannot see cells with our naked eyes, hence we use an aid of a microscope. So the parts of the microscope that we have are an ocular lens, better known as an eyepiece. We then have a body tube. We have a revolving nose piece, an arm, objectives. There are three objectives. There's one here, another one here, and another one here. You'll learn more about them on the next slide when you learn about the functions of the parts of a light microscope. We then have a stage clip. Those are the two stage clips. We have a diaphragm. We have a light source. And on the side we have an arm, a stage, condense, a coarse adjustment knob. We have a fine adjustment knob and a base. So for you to know more about these parts and their functions, you need to pay close attention to what my colleague is going to teach you about on the next slide. Thank you.
Afternoon class. So today's lesson will be about plant cells. As my colleague has already explained that today we'll be doing two types of cells, animal and plant cell. So my colleague Mr. Senga Baloi will be handling the animal cell part of things. So as you can see here on the image on the left side here, so a plant cell is a basic unit of life. A plant cell, like animal cell, they are eukaryotic cells, meaning that they have specialized compartments inside. As you can see here in the cell, we have different types of organelles inside the cell wall. So we have like water vacuole, Golgi body, nucleus, etc. So as you can see, an animal cell and plant cell are different because a plant cell has what? A cell wall, water vacuole, and can make its own food, which using what? The chloroplast. So now as moving on, we now know that a plant cell is a eukaryotic cell which has what? A true nucleus and other things. Now moving on to the next. Okay class, so on the following slide we're going to be looking at the nucleus, endoplasmic reticulum, and the Golgi body. So looking at the nucleus, a nucleus is a double membrane organelle that is surrounded by a nuclear envelope. The nuclear envelope are these two bilayers. So the nucleus also has these small holes which are called the nucleopore, which act as a gateway for substances to enter and leave the nucleus. So the nucleus also contains chromatin on the inside. It also has chromatin, which are chromosomes and associated proteins. It also contains the nucleolus, where ribosomal RNA is synthesized. And it also contains genetic material like DNA, in full called the deoxyribose nucleic acid. Now moving on to the endoplasmic reticulum. Endoplasmic reticulum is a continuous membrane with the nuclear envelopes or the nucleus. I'm sorry. So as we can look, this one here, we're going to be looking at the rough endoplasmic reticulum. The rough endoplasmic reticulum has two types, which is the smooth and the rough. But me, I'll be looking at the rough one, and my colleague, Mr. Senga Baloi, will be looking at the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. So the rough endoplasmic reticulum is continuous with the nuclear envelope and has membranous tubules, which are called cisternae. These membranous tubules, they're looking like tubes. These are called cisternae. The rough endoplasmic reticulum has ribosomes on the outside, so it also works for protein synthesis and for processing proteins found on the ribosomes. It is also a membrane for a factory membrane for cells. Now moving on to the Golgi body. This one is responsible also for finishing and sorting and shipping proteins. It has enclosed membranes which are called cisternae. These tubules here, as you can see here on the label, which are called cisternae, and is also a secretory vessel for protein to inside of the cell or to the cell membrane. And it also has two sides, which is the cyst phase and the trans phase. The cyst phase is for receiving proteins, and the trans phase is for transporting proteins with using one the secretory vesicles. Now moving on to the next slide. So now moving on to the next slide. So on this slide, we'll be dealing with mitochondria and chloroplast. So now, as you can see, the mitochondria is the picture, this big one, the one where my cursor is moving right now, the one which has matrix and ATP synthesis and DNA. So the mitochondria or mitochondrion is also known as the powerhouse of the cell, meaning that it's where energy is made for the cell so that it can be able to survive. And please excuse the noises that are being made outside. So now continuing, it produces large quantities of energy in the form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. It also stores calcium for the cell. The energy produced here is also due to cellular functions and basically all our biological processes in the site for respiration. Now moving on to this green organelle here called the chloroplast. The chloroplast, which is found in plants and algae. So this one is only found in what? Plants and algae. No, not in the animal cell, because of animal cell and plant cell are different. So this one is where the plant makes its own food so that it can be what? Autotrophic. It's a site for photosynthesis by synthesizing organic material and molecules using solar energy. Solar energy meaning energy from the sun. It also produces glucose, which can be used to produce ATP. It contains its own DNA and ribosome. It's also a bilipid layer. And again, the mitochondrion is also a bilipid layer and also has its own DNA, meaning that there's a theory called the endosymbiotic theory, which talks about where these things come from, but those will not be touched on this lesson, will be touched on the next lesson. Now moving on to the last slide. So the last slide will be talking about the the last slide now will be talking about the central vacuole and the cell wall. So the central vacuole contains all the central vacuole contains what is this? It's a layer that has organic nutrients such as proteins in seeds and contributes to the plant's growth by absorbing water and making the plant to expand. It also contains poisons so that it can chase away plant-eating organisms. You know, because those animals that are herbivorous like cows and whatnot, so that they cannot eat these plants. And now moving on to a cell wall. A cell, okay, so here we have a structure of a cell wall, but us will just do the simplified description of it because we won't go into detail much about it. So a cell wall gives the cell structure and makes sure that substances can enter and leave the cell, but it's semi-permeable, so that not all substances can enter and not all substances can leave. So a cell wall gives the cell the plant cell a rigid structure so that it can be rigid and not so that it cannot burst easily, because when it bursts it will die and the enclosed organelles will now leave the cell. So now this was my final section about plant cells, and this other section will be touched on in the next lesson. In the next part will be my colleague Mr. Senga Baloyi touching on the animal cell and its organelles that are there and which are not included on the plant cell. Thank you.
Afternoon, class. My name is Mr. Baloy. I'll be doing the animal cell part of cell. So I'll continue from what my colleagues have taught, and we'll be doing an animal cell. There's a typical example there. So an animal cell is a typical eukaryotic cell enclosed by a cellular membrane of which contains membrane-bound organelle. So, unlike other eukaryotic cells of plants and fungi, animal cells do not have like cell wall. So yeah, an animal cell contains cytoplasmic content which is enclosed by a plasma membrane. When we say cytoplasmic content, we talk about nucleus, lysosome, ribosomes, centrioles, and all of those. So, however, the cell has various structures inside, so we're gonna pay attention to those on the next slide. Thank you. Yes, moving on to the next slide. This is what we'll be focusing. Yes, in this slide, we're gonna be very briefly. We're gonna talk about what makes an animal cell, and how is it different from a plant cell. So, first, plant cell have a cell wall, and animal cell doesn't have a cell wall. And a plant cell have a chloroplast, which animal cell doesn't have. So a plant cell also have a central vacuole, which an animal cell doesn't have, but it has other structures supporting its function. However, with these variations, the organisms tend to vary in their nature. The organisms have different systems because of such variations within these cells. So we're moving to the following slide now. Here we'll be talking about lysosomes and ribosomes. As you can see, I have placed some structures to pay attention to. We are going to talk about lysosomes. So lysosomes are membrane enclosed organelles which contains an array of enzymes capable of breaking down all types of biological polymers, protein, lipids, carbohydrates, etc. So these lysosomes also can break down excess or dead cell part to make room. It is generally the digestive system of the cell. Now, ribosomes, these are small complex molecules found inside the living cell. They produce protein from amino acids during protein synthesis. They play an important role as they are a site for translation process of protein synthesis. Yeah, we move to the following slides now. On this one, we're gonna talk about smooth ER and centrioles. As you have structures there to pay attention to, let's discuss these. Yes, so smooth ER, this is a part of endoplasmic reticulum which do not contain ribosome on its surface. It synthesizes lipids. It is a component of detoxification, produces protein mainly present in cells secreting its specializations. So moving on to the centriole part, these are cylindrical structures in an animal cell near the nucleus. They play a significant role in cell division as they form spindle fibers for cytokinesis to further mitosis. I guess that was understandable. This was my last part of the presentation, and the following will be an activity which will seek knowledge from this lesson which I just presented.